And we're back with more live coverage from the 2010 Harlem Book Fair. Up next, a religion panel with a focus on interfaith dialogue.
Hello, good morning, everyone. Thank you all for being here. I'd like to thank Max Rodriguez and the Harlem Book Fair family who make the Harlem Book Fair possible. I'd also like to thank the Schomburg family, especially Chief Howard Dodson. As you may know, this year's fair includes a celebration of him, as he has been our leader here for a couple of decades and will be leaving. So we'd like to extend a special thanks to him. I'm Malaika Adero, Vice President, Senior Editor of Atria Books. I'm also a longtime resident of the Harlem community and have worked with Harlem Book Fair for many years, and I'm thrilled to be here. I was very grateful to Max Rodriguez for accepting the idea I had to organize a panel around what I think is one of the most critical questions of our time, and that opinion is shared by others, and that's the question of, can we all get along? Not along racial lines or along gender preference lines. Those seem easy sometimes by comparison. What we're talking about today is along religious lines. Can we get along? Christians, Jews, Muslims, Hindus, practitioners of Yoruba Buddhism, of course, live together, share families together all over the planet. Yet all over the planet, divergent faith-based communities are judging each other, discriminating against each other, waging war with each other. Our goal today is to consider an alternative to that, a way of building the bridges that we have to each other and hopefully achieving world peace in our lifetime. We have 4 wonderful thinkers and writers on the topic today who've graciously taken their time to be here and to read the book that inspired this panel in the first place. The title is God is Not a Christian Nor a Jew, Muslim, Hindu. God dwells with us, around us, and as us. And it was written by Bishop Carlton Pearson, who is here with us today. I became aware of Carlton Pearson's work with his previous book, The Gospel of Inclusion. It was submitted to me by his literary agent. He had great success with that book, having self-published it and sold 25,000 copies. He'd also attracted the attention of the media, and a documentary was done on his story, which he'll tell you more about. All that is in part to say I am his editor at Atria Books and have a vested professional interest in promoting this book, but I also have a personal vested interest in promoting any book, any person who is doing work in the interest of giving people greater understanding of themselves and each other, especially their belief systems. I'll begin now by giving a brief introduction of the panelists we have here, and then they'll talk more about themselves, and we'll hop right into the subject. Dr. Sarah Sayeed, who is sitting in the middle on the panel, is president of Women of Islam here in New York City. It's a coalition of professional and social activist Muslim women representing a broad spectrum of human rights and social justice interests and dedicated to the empowerment of women through knowledge and practice of Islam. With over 10 years' experience in interfaith dialogue, Dr. Sayeed is also a program and communication associate at the Interfaith Center, an organization working with grassroots religious leaders in the New York area to build interfaith partnerships focused on social justice. Dr. Sayeed holds a degree in sociology and Near East studies from Princeton University and an MA and PhD in communications from the University of Pennsylvania. We have one panelist who hasn't arrived yet, and hopefully she can. I know she was traveling from outside the country. I'll go ahead and read her bio in the hopes that she makes it before we finish the discussion, and that is Dr. Marta Moreno Vega. She's the president of the Caribbean Cultural Center, and she's conducted extensive research in Yoruba belief systems in the African diaspora, and has organized 3 international conferences uniting scholars and traditional leaders who are experts in these religions. She is the author of The Altar of My Soul, The Living Traditions of Santeria, and When the Spirits Dance Mambo, which is also the title of a wonderful documentary film she produced. She received her doctorate in Yoruba philosophy in the diaspora from Temple University. With us here at the end of the table is Dr. Obery Hendricks. He's been called one of the most provocative and innovative commentators on the intersection of religion, politics, and social policy in America today. Essential reading for Americans is what the Washington Post called Dr. Hendricks' most recent book, The Politics of Jesus, Rediscovering the True Revolutionary Nature of Jesus' Teachings and How They Have Been Corrupted. The Politics of Jesus was the featured subject of a nationally televised program called Class, Politics, and Christianity. He is currently professor of biblical interpretation at New York Theological Seminary. He holds the Master of Divinity from Princeton Theological Seminary, and both an MA and PhD in religion of late antiquity from Princeton. Last but not least, Dr. Carlton Pearson is a New Thought teacher. He was consecrated Bishop of the Azusa Interdenominational Fellowship of Christian Churches and Ministries in 1996. He was raised as a 4th-generation Pentecostal and shares the stories of his spiritual journey in a previous book as well called The Gospel of Inclusion. We tried as much as possible to have a wide representation of diverse spiritual communities here, and I'd also like to thank the people who could not be here, among them several rabbis who were very excited about the opportunity to have an interfaith discussion. So in their absence, I'm going to read a statement to kind of that our dialogue can spring from by Rabbi David Volpe, who Newsweek magazine called the best pulpit rabbi in America. He's with the Sinai Temple in Los Angeles. This is what he says. Religions are not the same. One claims a man can become God. Another claims the distance between humans and God is unbridgeable. One claims that God is not personal. Another insists that God is personal. Differences can be multiplied. They are real. They are significant. They are not ultimate, however. To the consternation of many of my fellow Jews, I always say that I'm charged with arguing Judaism's excellence, not its superiority. It is not my job to tell you why a faith that I live and love is better than one that I know sketchily or have never lived. That is particularly the case because all faiths are built on a powerful, unshakable intuition of something greater than ourselves. They are the daily acknowledgement of Wordsworth's a motion and a spirit that impels all thinking things, all objects of all thought, and rolls through all things. Religions are the attempt, sometimes honorable, sometimes craven, sometimes pristine in their nobility, sometimes regrettably cruel, to reach toward that spirit to live in harmony with it. Therefore, the essential question to any faith is not its dogma, but its realization. How does your attempt to live faithfully manifest in the world? Religions are different in innumerable ways. Ultimate reality is a unity, however, or as Judaism expresses it, God is one. And with that, I'd like to start with Bishop Carlton Pearson, again, author of Not God is Not a Christian. And I'd like for you to talk to us about, first, why that title and why this book now.
My first book, thank you very much. Honored to be here. Honored to meet you. Thank you for your good work. Malaika. Love that name. You didn't tell us what it meant, but it's wonderful.
It's a lullaby. It means my angel, as a matter of fact, which only a mother could believe about her daughter.
No.
You know.
Well, You've been mine. Thank you. Welcome all of you. Thank you for coming today. Honored to be with this distinguished panel to discuss this book, God is Not a Christian. Jesus said God is spirit, and they that worship him, or I would say it, removing the gender reference to God. If Adam, out of Adam came supposedly Eve, then he was both male and female initially. And there's an expression of the male and female in God. And I'm depersonalizing God as Jesus did. God is spirit, and they that worship him, or it, must worship him in spirit and in truth. I used the term God is not a Christian in a debate I was having with somebody because I got initially into universalism, that if, from the Christian perspective, if in fact Jesus is Savior of the world and not just for the world, and that if Jesus came to redeem humankind to God, then unless he failed, that work of redemption is accomplished. According to the document that we call Bible, he said it is finished. And that was before he died, but he meant the work of redemption has been accomplished. I'm finished. Now I'm committing my spirit to God. So I took that position to say that basically the world, if it needs to be saved, is saved, but it doesn't know it. And many so-called believers or Christians don't believe it. So I wrote the book, God is Not a Christian, and in the Gospel of Inclusion, and in explaining that to people who were debating that premise, I said, after all, God is not a Christian or a Jew or a Hindu or a Muslim. God is not religious or religion. God is spirit. And if we could get away from our particular denominational, sometimes boxing of God in, we might be able to have some more meaningful dialogues and have less tension and hatred and terrorism, bigotry, biases on the planet. We would be more of a peaceful world. So out of that came this book, God is Not a Christian, and the closest to God any of us may ever be is self-actualization. The best God you may ever know is the God you are. Your own divinity, self-discovery, self-recovery. You're made in the image and likeness of God, then you are imaginary gods. You're deities. We are all divinities. And we share the planet together and peacefully. So that's the beginning of a longer discussion, of course. The book will really open your eyes and make you want to slap me more.
And I'm happy to say Dr. Vega has joined us. She's at the end of the table. I did do a brief introduction of you. But I'm going to ask Dr. Sayeed, Dr. Hendricks, and Dr. Vega to describe themselves, who they are personally as religious and spiritual people, and also to refer to the work that they do in relation to the topic. Dr. Sayeed.
First, I want to thank you also for hosting this and for inviting me to be a part of it. I think it's a really critical conversation, as you said, and I'm grateful to join in. As far as about me, I guess I want to start out by saying something which I think is very critical in your book, which is that faith is a process. And if you had asked me 10 years ago, can we all get along, I might have given you a different answer because I was in a different space at that time, and I was in a very questioning space in that time. But today I can tell you that I think we can get along, and I think we have to get along because we don't really have any other alternative. And for me as a Muslim woman, the process of learning about getting along has really become a process of learning about my faith. And knowledge is critical for me as a Muslim woman. And in terms of the Quran itself, the first word that was revealed to Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, was the word read. So I think that we can only define faith as ours if we go through this process of questioning and learning and unlearning sometimes things that are not helpful to us as people of faith. And I guess the other thing I want to say about myself is that I am not a scholar. of the religion. I am not, an ordained clergy person, and I'm not a professor of theology. I am somebody who is a practicing Muslim and who tries to integrate the things that I'm learning on a daily basis into my life and practice. And I think I wanted to say that also because I think another thing you talk about in your book is that we don't need to be experts and scholars, and the way for us forward is really for us to know God by knowing ourselves. And we don't need to be scholars to know ourselves. I mean, we're human beings, and that's all we're expected to know ourselves as. So I think that your book raises a lot of really, really important questions, and I thank you for writing it for all people of faith, including Christians, of course. Thank you.
Dr. Hendricks.
Yes, good morning. I'm glad to be here, and I'd like to begin by saying that Carlton Pearson's book is one of the bravest religious statements that I've read by a contemporary Christian, and I commend you. I know how much pain you suffered from so many of our supposedly godly colleagues, and in order to speak out. But I'm very impressed and very proud of the position you've taken. I am a professor of biblical studies. I'm a professional biblical scholar who writes on Jesus as an historical figure and as a figure out of the Gospels, well, which is where we mostly know him from. But I'm someone who takes Jesus so seriously that I refuse to worship him. Because he never told anyone to worship him. He told folk to worship God. He said to follow him. And so I understand Jesus as an ethical teacher. And Carlton mentioned earlier about how when Jesus said it was finished, that redemption was finished. I understand redemption in terms of Jesus' teachings. What was finished is that his teachings were finished. His teachings, if you recall those who've read the Gospels, he says almost nothing about what people should believe, almost nothing, but he says how we should act and live in the world. It's relational. And what I try to do in my work is take the overlay away and look at him in his context, and with regard to matters of justice, poverty and wealth, and the disparities of poverty and wealth. Most recently, I'm in the midst of writing an essay right this moment on class and political conservatism and Jesus' opposition to how political conservatism is anathema to the teachings of Jesus. A lot of those in the audience will disagree maybe, but from where I sit, they have a long way to refute that. So I'd also just like to say that I understand, as a biblical scholar and one who takes Jesus seriously, I understand this whole thing as a path. It's a journey, it's a path to God consciousness, not to a place of faith, but a path to a higher God consciousness. Is what Jesus taught, and what Paul taught as well. When one tries to step aside outside of the theological blinders and overlay that Paul has been subjected to. And so I look forward to this conversation because we really need to look at God as not as a personality or a person, but as an overarching principle that is too large to be contained by any of our categories, and also discuss this whole enterprise as a path to a higher consciousness that is transformative and that will transform and renew our minds, as Paul wanted to say, but only through the practice through ethical practice of justice and loving our neighbor and striving to serve the least of these in the world. So I look forward to this conversation.
Marta, Dr. Vega.
Well, I'm Marta Moreno Vega, and I'd like to place my sacred beliefs in context, right? I was brought up in East Harlem, El Barrio, on 102nd Street. My parents believed in Spiritism, that is, that Spirit speaks, that we have access to divine intelligence through our ancestral worship, and that through Spirit, right, and the process of communicating with Spirit, and the ability to communicate with Spirit allows us to be Spirit, allows us to be sacred. And therefore, growing up in the kind of an Afro-Puerto Rican home, the process, as others have alluded to, is one that you continue to learn, right, and continue to learn information with what your cultural and your traditional practices have been. So that I grew up understanding that Spirit talks, understanding that Spirit heals and guides. It's later, as a high school student and as a college student, that I begin to research art history, that I understand that the objects that are in my grandmother's home directly relate to African divinities, the Orishas of West Africa. So El Egua behind the door, Ogun behind the door, Ochosi behind the door, connected our belief systems directly to the Yoruba peoples of West Africa. And then as a scholar and investigating these traditions, I understood that these traditions not only traveled to Puerto Rico, but Cuba, Brazil, Trinidad, Haiti, and throughout the communities of African descendants in the South, right, and in the North. So that the process has been, as all of us have gone through a process of learning and connecting, that the forces of nature, the divinities that the Orishas and Spirit represent, right, are sacred. And that the most sacred part of us is ourselves. Because we have the ability through being part of the sacred to make things happen and to live in a manner that allows our community, our families to heal. And through that process, right, is that I've come to my belief system through family and through learning. And I'm not a theologian. I'm part of a sacred continuum, if you will, that I find throughout the African diaspora. I just came back from Puerto Rico and Cuba. And again, seeing Spirit function, absolutely connected to ancestral heritage, is critical. In that process, I've also understood that our people have had the divine intelligence and the secular intelligence to include other traditions, right? Because of the process we have gone through as African descendants. The process of colonization has imposed other traditions. But our people and their intelligence have been able to transform that imagery and see it and connect it to the ancestral past. So although, let's say, my grandmother said she was Catholic, she never went to church. Church was our home temple, and we knew to worship at our home temple. So there's nothing more sacred and a place no more sacred than your home. Because that's where the divine resides, where you reside. So I understood that throughout. So I never went to church. So the concept of God, as I understand it in the Christian sense, the understanding of Jesus, as I understand it in the Christian sense, is not what I practice or I have been brought up with. Although, again, Catholic images have been part of my reality, right? And I see the same thing in Cuba, I see it in Brazil, and so on and so forth. So my understanding of the sacred is that, you know, ancestral and natural powers are powers that we access as well. And understanding those powers allows us to be sacred and heal in the world.
Thank you. In the interest of transparency, I should say and identify myself, born in the South, raised in the African Methodist Episcopal Zion Church and also in the Baptist Church. In college, I began to study Islam and made Shahada. Also in those college years, I learned about Buddhism and chanted Nam Myoho Renge Kyo and other, you know, Eastern religions. Someone described people like me as, you know, kind of eating at the buffet of religion, but not really honoring any of them. I beg to differ. I think I honor all of them. I read Thich Nhat Hanh, a Buddhist monk who talks about honoring all his religious heritages. So this brings me to the question, well, the other thing I should say, it seems to me, and all that I have learned, not being a scholar either, is that there's more that is similar in our belief systems than is different, and the differences tend to be superficial ones. You refer to that also, Bishop Carlton, in the book. So my question is, what purpose does religion serve in these times? And does God approve? Is religion important to God? And what are the importance of ritual? Because again, it is the way we practice that is more different than our fundamental beliefs. Bishop Carlton.
My Pentecostal roots, and I'm 4 generations, classical, tongue-talking, pew-jumping, devil-thumping, Bible-toting preacher. I cast the devil out of the devil. So we believe, much like Dr. Vega, in spiritual possession or spirit possession, that you can be possessed by spirit. Now, in some traditions, you call Holy Spirit, we refer to the Holy Spirit as holy because you believe there is an unholy spirit. I just believe in spirit, and I'm getting away from all the different dramatizations, if you will, of the God consciousness. We are afraid of this invisible, ubiquitous entity that has a hired nemesis called the devil, and both of them are after you. I got basically tired of looking at a sweet face like this that might be Islamic and dismissing her to hell, never even knowing her name, her mother's name, her family. I got tired of seeing, and from our tradition, the women were not allowed to wear makeup or color their hair or cut their hair. Some of them didn't even bother to comb their hair. Everything was such a sin. And so I basically got disgruntled with dismissing people to hell, so many. Plus, not to mention my uncles and my cousins, all the backslidden saints. And so it seemed like the devil that we were taught was winning the war, and Jesus and God and holiness and righteousness and the scriptures and the blood and the cross was a waste of time. So I grew up, though now I'm nearing 60 years old, and I'm having to reconsider what I believe, why I believe it, and how those beliefs affect the quality of my life and my behavior and my worldview and my values. So it's taken me half a century to reconsider what I think about God, because what you think about God will determine how you treat what you call God's creation, whether that's the universe or other people in it. I determined the word universe to be unit, one verse, version, or versification of the whole. That we're all interconnected. That this is a verse or version of me, as is Dr. Obery or Dr. Vega. These are expressions, verses in my life. And the more I get to know them and honor them and respect them, the better I get to know and honor and respect myself. Now that doesn't sound like religious terminology, because I'm trying to get further away from religion. Religion is man's attempt to find this thing we call God. And I'm not sure that you can know God other than just experience God. Like you don't know wind, but you experience it. You don't know rain. You don't know your television, but you watch it. You don't know how to fix it. So there's a lot of things you can experience without knowing, and I'm not sure how important it is to know, but to value the experience.
Dr. Sayeed.
Yeah, I wanted to talk a little bit about rituals, because you were, and whether that helps us in terms of understanding God. And I think this goes back to the question or the thought that faith is a process. And I think for Muslims, we're required to pray 5 times a day, and we are also required to do those prayers in Arabic. And if you think about it, the vast majority of the world of practicing Muslims are not Arabic speakers. So for many people, unless they've really studied the language, they're reciting their prayers in a language that's not familiar to them. But yet, it gives them solace. And because of the way the Arabic language is and the way that it sounds and the way that it's constructed, there is an inner kind of beauty and mystery to it that people derive satisfaction and closeness to God through, but yet the intellectual aspect of knowing what they're saying is sometimes missing for people who are not, native Arabic speakers. And I think for me, as somebody who's not a native Arab speaker, I mean, I had to really think about what it is that I was trying to say. And growing up, there was an effort to teach kids what are they really saying when they're praying. But to really claim that as mine has taken a really long time. And even during my daily prayers, and this is true for if you ask any Muslim, I mean, the ability to concentrate and focus in one's prayer is so fleeting, and it's such a gift. And you really have to constantly strive for it. And I think that's why we're asked to pray so many times a day, because it's so challenging. But when it happens, when there is that fleeting connection to God, it's very moving. And at the same time, because of the awesomeness of God, I don't think that it's a feeling that we can sustain for a long period of time, because our hearts and our minds are limited in terms of comparing it to the infiniteness of God. So really, I think that rituals for me, again, over time have become important, but it's an importance that I have to be vigilant about, because it's easy to forget and not just kind of do it as a ritual without meaning. So that was my thought on that.
Obery?
Yeah, I think this is an important question. What purpose does religion serve in these times? And unfortunately, I think that what it serves more than anything else in these times is a divisive function. People are divided, particularly throughout the world, but in this context, very much divided by religion. Because we must remember that religion is about conformity. Religion is not about freedom. It is about getting one to function within certain kinds of boundaries. It's also a way of saying, I am and you're not. It's a way of demonizing and saying who's in the in crowd and who's in the out crowd. And we certainly have learned how to do that to a high degree in Christianity. I'm just about sick of hearing about who's saved and who ain't. And part of the problem is, and the problem, it's an expression of this problem, but also a cause of this problem. That is this tradition, this lack of interiority. Everything is external now. You have to say things a certain way, and you have to be able to confess things a certain way. And you say amen in church the wrong way, people look at you funny. Yep. And there's really, when I say no tradition of interiority, think about it. Everything's exterior. There's no room for, in few religious traditions, is there room for meditation. Is real periods of solitude and fasting. Nowhere are in few Christian churches is that ever taught or shown any real value. And so what religion becomes then is a badge of honor, in many instances a way to justify ourselves. I would rather that folk we never call ourselves anything, Muslim, Christian, Yoruba, anything. Though I must admit that many that Yoruba and other traditions, to my understanding, aren't as exclusionary as the major traditions of the world. But I'd rather people just tried to follow some beliefs and looked at it as trying to treat people right and trying to honor God by honoring God's creation. Because until that happens, religion will continue to serve as the most divisive force of this time, the source of the most ugliness. Now, there's a lot of love in it. I was raised in the Baptist church. I know about that. But in its public manifestations, it is very, very ugly and very divisive and is not bringing people together and is not moving the masses toward a higher God consciousness, but more toward an obsession and a preoccupation with external confession and often dead and nearly meaningless ritual.
I agree.
Dr. Vega?
Well, I guess I ask you to think from a different perspective. From what I understand Christianity to be is that the fundamental belief is that you're born with original sin. And when I had my children, I was very clear that my children were not born with sin. And as the mother of those children and the father of those children, we were not born with sin. So fundamentally, when you're looking at Native and African traditions, the concept of devil does not exist. And the concept of original sin does not exist. And I think that that does a very important thing as you're functioning, because you don't see yourself as having to devoid yourself of sin or others of sin. And so therefore you function and walk in the world differently. Because the notion that you are sacred, the notion that your children are sacred, the notion that you're in the world to do good, to heal, is critical and it's basic to whatever belief system I think one should be part of. Because of the history, as I noted before, the Lukumi or the Yoruba or Fong traditions have survived under enslavement. So they have assumed other traditions and other religions and are inclusive traditions. I was at a ceremony in Cuba recently, and when Spirit manifested, it said Salam Alaikum. And the response was Malaikum Salah, right? So that automatically tells you inclusion. If you look at the altars, there are Asian divinities, Song Fan Kong, right? Because there was a strong Chinese community that was brought in as indentured servants in Cuba. So that because of the history that we have experienced as a people outside of, let's say, Christian traditions, the traditions that we have maintained have been inclusive. They've had to be inclusive in order to survive. I think ritual has to be defined, because we do ritual all the time, you know. There's a difference between ritual and sacred ritual. Every day, without thinking, you probably brush your teeth, you know, put on the coffee and so on, almost unconsciously. That's a ritual. And when it's interrupted, you don't feel right. I think that we're talking about another type of ritual, which is a spiritual, sacred ritual, that when you come together in community, how important that is. And Howard, the chief of the Schomburg Library, said something at a conference which struck me. One time he said, we weren't supposed to have family. We weren't supposed to have community after being torn out of West and Central Africa over a period of 500 years, right? Yet we recreated family. We recreated community. And why did we do that? Because we understood and we understand that being in community, being communal, is necessary to your existence, right? So that ritual with family, with community, is absolutely sacred. What is not sacred is to say that my gathering is better than your gathering, or your gathering is less than mine, right? So that the question is, how do we gather as a community? How do we see each other as a community? And that we see the good in the other because we see the good in ourselves, right? So that if we frame that practice of coming together as ritual, whether we come together in our homes, whether we come together in whatever temple or whatever you define as another space, right? It's because of healing, it's because of reaffirming, right, that we survive, that we thrive, and that we want our children to thrive. So I think there's a process of redefinition and rethinking, which you address in your book, that's critical. But it's not something that's foreign to us, is the point I want to make. It's not foreign to us. I think the process of colonization has imposed a God image, a God thought, right, in Christianity that was part of the process of enslavement, and we have to understand that. So that when you're speaking about how do we break the chains of enslavement, yeah, right? Because Malcolm said it. What enslaved us? It was the Bible and the bullet. Right? So we have to be very clear. So I think that we have the opportunity, going to your question, of re-examining, right, what allowed us to survive and allowed us to thrive. and then pull away those pieces that keep us from connecting as a community. Because understand this clearly, the African American population in the United States is less than the population in Latin America of African descendants and the Caribbean, and obviously Africa. If we have a different way of thinking as a sacred community, we're thinking as a global community. And what ties us as a global community? And what ties us as a spiritual community? And a community that has the power to change whatever is affecting our community, wherever we are. And that's sacred.
One of the points I want to make about ritual, because we all have them, rites, rituals, and rules. The question is, what are they based on? Fear or faith? As Donald Walsh says, what you fear most, you will ultimately experience. Most people, but I said, but what you faith most, you will ultimately experience. You become what you think about most. And if you practice ritual, rites, and rules based on the fear of the gods or the fear of not practicing them, is your faith in your ritual or your faith in your fear? Why do we do what we do? Whether it's the communion, common union, Vladimir Lenin changed it to communism. Common union, the common union, where now they're calling President Obama a socialist. Well, Christian communion is built around a socialistic, if I use that term, it's frightening to some of you, but it means that we are all commoners in union. And the ritual of communion or community or commonness is that we respect each other's existence on the planet, your right to be here, and you remember that incarnately, pre-incarnately, before you were in flesh or incarnate, you agreed to come here. What if you are not a victim of destiny or creation? What if you agreed to come here but forgot it? What if before you, there's a scripture where Jeremiah is quoting God as saying, before I formed you in your mother's womb, I knew you. Who is the unformed you? Skinless, sinless, endless. I define sin as an inappropriate response to a legitimate need. Religion deals with the inappropriateness of the response. Christ's consciousness or God consciousness would deal with the legitimacy of the need, not a bunch of rules. I respect the fact that human beings are going to be human. And in this book, God is not a Christian, Jew, Muslim, Hindu. God is in us, around us, with us, as us, that I am looking at divinity right now. This room is full with divinities. How you express, expose, and experience your divinity is up to you. I can't dictate that to you. That's what religion tries to do. Our religions, Christianity, Judaism, we try to dictate to people how they should experience divinity. And I can't do that for you. Now we're living in a world where folks are saying, I want to do what I want to do, my way. My kids are telling me that. I got a 16-year-old and a 13-year-old, and they're different than the way we were raised. Back watching black and white television, my mom and them had it in the house. And mom and them told us about God, and mom and them told us about the devil, and their mom and them told them about the devil, and their mom and them, none of them could read, told us about God. And so we have to rethink all this, and that's the emphasis of the book. Let's rethink what we believe, why we believe it, what the rituals, the rites, the rules, the rigors, what they mean, how they affect us, how the Earth Project is working. Can we all get along? How's that working for you? Yes, Doctor, what's called?
I wanted to challenge us all to think a little bit about this idea of religion being a divider. I think part of the work that we need to do is to reclaim the beauty and the simplicity of religion. Because one of the reasons why we think that religion is a divider is because we are told that it's a divider. And it's a media message that we get constantly. And I think that we also regurgitate that image. I mean, we cannot assume that just because, there are conflicts in the world that are based on religion. That's very true. There are also a lot more people in the world who coexist in spite of religious differences that we don't hear about in the media. And I was born in India, and I was surrounded by people who were Hindu, and India is a place where there are religious conflicts. but there's also a lot of harmony. And I think that we need to see that what religion was given to us for was to apprehend and comprehend, who we are and to try to get closer to God. And part of this work is to really remind ourselves that all religions share that core message in common. And the basic message of be good to your neighbor is true for all faith traditions. That's not something we can escape. And I was just listening to a sheikh, a scholar, Sheikh Abdullah Adami the other day, and he was talking about how, if you wanted to explain Islam to somebody, the core tenets of the faith you can boil down into one or two, thoughts. And among those thoughts is, know yourself, know God, and be good to each other, and take care of the earth. I mean, there are a lot of things in Islam that are less that are kind of subject to changes in time over the nature of, the context we live in and how Islam is practiced across so many different cultures. But the core message of all religions is the same. And I think as people who are thinking about these things, we really need to go back to that core truth.
That's a very good point. Talking about reclamation of the intentionality of the great prophets and God-realized people, so very, very important. I think there are two different questions. I mean, the question we were asked is, what purpose does religion serve this time? What purpose should religion serve is a different question. Religions began, and I'm speaking as a scholar of religion, they began relationally. They began concerned with relations, human beings being able to live in the world together and also to develop a higher relationship or higher consciousness of God. But the reason why religion today, the purpose they serve, is largely divisive, because most of them are not largely relational anymore. They're largely doctrinal and doctrinal orthodoxy. And so I'm speaking of the highly articulated, what they call major religions of the world. They're mostly doctrinal. And so you have all kinds of doctrinal hoops you got to jump through. You got to believe in this and believe in that. And those who don't are infidels, they're outsiders. And I agree, if we get back to the core, we focus on the relationality of it. But today that is not the major focus, unfortunately, in the world. And that's why Carlton made a response off mic. I don't know if everyone heard, but he said that most of the problems in the world, most of the conflicts in the world are clothed in religious garb, because the obsession with doctrines and doctrinal orthodoxy makes it so easy to point to the other to others as the other, and to demonize them. Yes, to demonize them. And so I think your point is so very well taken, Dr. Sayeed, that we have to try to reclaim the core of relationality, and remember that religion is given to us to help us to love our God with all our heart, soul, mind, and strength, our neighbor as ourselves, as Jesus would say. In other words, to develop a higher God consciousness that is expressed in the world, and the only way spirituality expresses in the world and how we treat one another. Until we do that, we'll just continue to be mired in doctrinal orthodoxy and to willingly wear those shackles that aren't doing a lot to make the world a better place.
I'd like to shift the conversation a little bit, and I'm reminded of it when you mentioned the term demonizing. One of the things that so many major religions, and minor religions for that matter, seem to have in common is, I'll just put it this way, placing women in a lesser position, regarding women less than. What's also in common, it seems, with most religious institutions is that they are so held up by women. You know, I mean, the black church would not be, in my opinion, if it were not for women holding it up. Islam. I mean, so I wanted to talk about that a little bit, as to how we shift. Also, it's my understanding that many religious traditions began as being matriarchal, you know, and at some point in history across the globe, it flipped. I don't know the dynamic of that, but what do we do about that now? We look in judgment at each other. A Christian can look at Muslims and say, oh, they oppress their women, you know, but yet we do not have women represented in the hierarchy of the church. Maybe the Yoruba traditions are different or more evolved or more progressive in that regard. I'm not sure. I don't know. But I would like to talk about the role of women now in religious communities, and I would like to believe that we could be a force or at the vanguard of changing and remedying some of the ills that we have between religious communities, and I wonder if you feel that way as well.
I have a chapter in the book called that deals with spirituality, sexuality, sensuality, and spirituality. I remember one of my pastors, and I had three, saying to me as a young man in Southern California when I went to the store with him, son, don't touch that. White man will get you. Put that down, boy. Don't get, white man will get you. White man will get you. And I was very young, and he was from the South, so he didn't want me to, you know, kids playing with stuff and something would fall on the floor and he'd have to pay for it, or the white man would get me. The same preachers would say, stay away from them girls. They'll get you. The woman will get you. They're evil. My grandfather used to say, you know why God named Eve? Because she was evil. So, but the term evening, evil, even, that consciousness is that there's something wrong with the female, that she'll take you down. Now that's global for some reason. We've been taught this for many, many centuries, and so men still struggle with the value and validity and valor of the female. The first woman a man ever loves is his mother, takes his first meal from her breast, and sometimes even carries that devotion into his marriage and calls his wife Mama. Mama, what you... Mom. I remember the first time I tried, my wife said, don't you even think about it.
Somebody laughing.
Yes. But she's always saying, you need to get in touch with your feminine self. You need to get in touch with your feminine self. And I say, I'm in touch with my feminine self. I'm trying to get in touch with your feminine self. Now that's the conflict in the relationship. Well, that same thing plays out in religion. We're taught these principles from religion. Mother Earth, the womb of the earth, the female aspect, the female deity, the female aspect of the self. We've played these things down, and it's just like race relations are changing around the world. That is evolving. There are more women in seminary than there are men.
Okay.
But seminary comes from seminary. You're seeding. We have a lot of terms that are related to how we look at the anatomy of the body, and resurrection and seeding into the earth and being born again and birthing. There's a lot of female references in there. The womb, the man with the womb. A man is a female woman. A woman is a male man, and a man is a female. What is it? A woman is a female man.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And a man is a male man, even though we don't know what a person is. We're very much alike, is what I'm saying. But tradition teaches us to fear the female, like we fear the devil.
Yeah.
Devil, evil, Eve. Devil, evil. So that terminology, and words are powerful. We don't know that there are hidden subliminal messages that come to our mind that make us fear females, fear the devil, fear evil, fear God, fear the ritual or violating it. So we deal with that in the book, and it's just a discussion. I don't know that I say anything declarative, but we discuss why we think these things, and I'm still rethinking them. Is that a question?
Yeah, I think well, as a scholar, my focus, of course, is Afro-Caribbean religions and Afro-Latin American religions. I think that we have to know more, because I think we make assumptions. If you look at how traditional religions, African traditional religions have evolved in Brazil, women are the heads of the houses in Brazil. Women are overwhelmingly the heads of candomblé houses in Brazil. If you look throughout the tradition, many different types of configurations have happened under the title of Yoruba traditions or Lukumi traditions or candomblé traditions. So I don't think that we can make blanket statements because there's more investigation that we have to do in terms of how our traditions have survived in the Americas. And the historical continuum, which continues to transform these traditions as they meet each other in the world, and as they meet each other in New York City, where you have the Shango tradition of Trinidad, the Voodoo tradition of Haiti, Candomblé Brazil, the Spiritism of Puerto Rico, and so on. So that, as the bishop said, our traditions are always evolving, and that's the beauty of it. And we have to understand that when we stick to sort of a McDonald's package, or we try to make it a McDonald's package, is when it becomes dangerous. We as people change daily, and our belief systems undergo change. And if you look at what we have done as African descendants throughout the world, you'll see that different configurations have been developed to allow our survival and our connection to spirit and our connection to the sacred.
Okay. Dr. Sayeed, very important to hear a response. Make sure it's brief. Do we have time for a few questions after that? Okay.
I think for me as a Muslim, you know, from the very beginning I was taught that God is beyond gender. God also in Islamic theology has 99 names, and you'll be happy to know that one of them is not Muslim. But one of the first names of God is Rahman, which it means compassionate. It actually derives from the same root verb in Arabic, which means womb.
Rahim.
So Rahim, so Rahim. So that's, for me as a woman, part of living my faith has been to reclaim that femininity and the importance of that. And because there's no doubt that there are many interpretations of Islamic theology that are privileging male rights over women that I don't think God wanted us to do. I should also say that a lot of this, going back to the first comments, has been about learning what does my faith tradition actually have to say. And one of the things we're working on at Women in Islam is to try to create inclusive mosques, because this is an area which needs worldwide attention. And part of that process was to go back and ask, what does Islam have to say about that? And it really meant educating ourselves and others that the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, told the men in his society and all men coming after him not to forbid women from going to the mosque. So we're working on trying to, put that message forward and to try to create a more inclusive spiritual space for women.
On that note, this has been a great conversation, and do we have any time? We have 15 minutes for a Q&A. Please move to the mic.
Can I just make this?
Yeah, sure. As they're moving to the mic, Dr. Hendricks.
Say this. I think it's important, though, not to minimize the discrimination against women and the diminution of women's worth in various religions. I mean, we do that in Christianity. They do it in Islam. And what Dr. Sayeed talks about in terms of getting to know religions better, I think it's part of, we have to see what is cultural baggage and what is religious baggage. And much of the mistreatment of women in Islam, and we talk about in America anyway, we know is cultural. And the same in Christianity. And so I just wanted to put that out there. We don't want to overlook that it really is happening, and it's really major in churches and in religion today, and shameful in most of them.
True.
Thank you so much. We are going to open up to questions from the audience, sir.
Good afternoon. My question has to do with violence and God. I'm doing research, and I'm looking at spirituality in the sense of forming identity. And one of the problems whether you go from Africa to Christianity to Islam to any form of religion, there's so much violence from the Crusades forward. in Africa, for instance, you study the power of naming a child and how there's a community, but at the same time you have so much violence. In Christianity, we go and do things in the name of God, and almost like there's so much violence and hurt and pain. So I'm wondering, from each panelist's perspective, what is the role of God, religion, and violence in today's context? Because I'm just very concerned about what images we're sending out, especially when I see a woman, Islam woman, who's beaten on TV. You know, especially when I see us going and saying this is a Christian nation, but we're going and we're fighting other people. So any perspective of violence you could share would be helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody?
Violence is endemic to many religions. You look in the Hebrew Bible, God is described as vengeful and jealous and murderous, and as it tells a certain chosen people they can go into the land of Canaan and slay everybody and take the land. Those are primitive responses that have been sacralized. So, and what that raises is that many religions sacralize what they do. I mean, they justify what they do by saying that God tells us this is what we are to do. And that's one of the problems with religion versus spirituality. Spirituality, of course, is about a greater God consciousness with regard and expressed through relationality. And there's really no real room for violence in it. And that's why we have to do, as Dr. Sayeed and others say, we have to try to step back from, step back from the blinders of religion and try to get clear on the spiritual core and not be bound by doctrine, because doctrine divides and it does express itself in violence in different ways, not just murderous violence. It might just be me looking down my nose at you, which is a certain form of violence as well.
And as far back as we can trace man's faith in God, we find man's fear of God, humans' fear of God. That the first time lightning came out of the sky and struck something and burned it, can you imagine the first prehistoric people seeing that? What they would have thought? Where did that light come? Lightning. Why was that God? That they couldn't see what was up there. So we developed and evolved these concepts of God based on fear. When you have Son of God S-U-N and Son of God S-O-N, you have Zeus and Jesus. You have all the combination of mythology, magic, miracles, all combining to evolving and revolving consciousness of where we are today. We think God has a temper, a terrible temper, anger management problem, needs Dr. Phil as somebody to counsel him. The way we've been taught, this God is dangerous and visceral. Vengeance is mine, saith the Lord. I'm quoting scripture. God is but we're supposed to love our enemies. Jesus says, then God's going to reserve hell for them. Hitler, and I mentioned this in the book, burned arguably 6 million to 12 million people, Jews and others, gay people, crippled people, people of African descent. Hitler hated them. But at least they died and stopped hurting. We're taught that God has an inferno, where Hitler got his idea of an inferno, he's going to torch people infinitely. Your mom and them that wasn't saved, the uncles, your crazy cousin, not to mention the Mussolini or supposedly Saddam. All these concepts we have of who God's going to kill and torture. Not just kill them, but torture them. So violence comes out of our concept of a God who has a terrible anger management problem, is violent itself. And so we have devised all these reasons and justifications. If I think God hates Muslims, do I have any problem dropping a bomb on them? If I think God hates gays, do I have any trouble killing them or torturing them or discriminating? Or if I think God hates people of black color because Cain was turned black? That's what we were taught from a kid. If everybody came from Africa, we was all black at one time until Cain sinned. Then they turned some of them white. But up until then, everybody...
I think we need to remind ourselves that violence is endemic to the human condition. I think we have inclinations to aggression that we see from, a very young age, and an inclination to assert our will. And part of what we need to do in terms of reclaiming religion is taking responsibility for what is in our human condition and using religion as a tool not to promote violence, but to promote nonviolence, because in all of the faith traditions, that message is there. And this is not, again, to deny that it has been abused and taken as a way to rationalize the violent response, but I think what we need to do is go back to that, again, that core message. That's not what religion was given to us for. It was given to us for love and caring for the earth and for each other.
Thank you.
Blessings to each and every one of you here. I have two very quick comments and a question. My question I want to get out very quickly, and I am an educator. I work with young people. And within my community, and I'm speaking of the African American community now, we have a serious crisis. I work with young people every day, and they are so disconnected from spirit. And we have so much work to do to reconnect them. I think that in large part it comes from doctrine. It comes from the internal work not being done, the work of the interior. And I would like to hear very quickly what each of you would have to say. And I will say that my husband and I have two daughters, and we have raised them in the Christian tradition, but one thing that we have done with them, and I have gotten this from a 12-step program, and that is, there's a saying in 12-step program which is really seeped in spirituality, and that is, trust God, clean house, help others. And that is the message that we have given to our daughters, and I think that's a message for young people, but I really would like to hear you say what we could do to help our young people in our community reestablish themselves and understand that God is, and He is love.
Thank you. Thank you. Dr. Vega?
Well, I'm the mother of two sons. And again, I say I was brought up as a family of spiritists and in the Lukumi tradition, and they have been brought up in the same tradition. And I think that young people learn by seeing, by having, I hate the word role models, but being able to see what behavior should be. And I think that if we provide the spaces where young people are in a balanced space, a sacred space, and a sacred space can be school, because I started my career as a public school teacher. And when I started teaching, the first thing I did when I saw the condition of the deaf with words that children shouldn't be seeing and so on and so forth was have them paint the room and make the environment something that they would be proud of. And I think that that's key to connecting young people to how and how they should see the world and how they should see themselves in the world. And the only way you can do that is by being in spaces that allow you to replicate what you see and how to behave. And we don't have those spaces. School is not that anymore. I don't know that teachers understand their role as spiritual leaders. And I don't say as religious leaders.
Yes.
Because there's a difference between spirituality and religion.
Yes. Yes.
So please understand that I'm saying my constant conversation is about spirit. It's not about religion.
Right.
Good point. Good point.
And our teachers have to be spiritual leaders and create spiritual spaces and place, I don't want to say, I'm looking for a word that doesn't say barrier, but place ethical ways of behaving that are unacceptable, right, in a spiritual space. And I think that we all have to see ourselves as spiritual leaders and create those spaces where our young people can emulate that spirit.
Spiritual being.
Okay, let's hear the next question.
I'd like to thank you all very much for your comments. The conversation is occurring at many different levels, but what I'd like to ask you all to speak about is this business of spirituality and religion. I think we need to address the issue of religion as an institution and the socio-political nature of religion. Because for us as African people, we become very confused with respect to this business of spirituality versus religion. Thank you very much.
Socio-political. I'm not exactly sure where you were, though I do my work with this. My work is in the socio-political. I'm not, I'll address it as I understand it. Religion is, religion in the public square today is a political force. And yes, religion can be a very oppressive force. And I think that, I mean, I really can't add much more than my earlier comments, other than to say that religion today in the public sphere is identified with conservatism, political conservatism. We've allowed political conservatism, which comes from trying to conserve the balance of power and wealth in society as it is. We've let those in power conflate those sort of selfish class sensibilities with moral conservatism. And so you have people thinking that if you're going to be morally conservative, you know, like no one's more conservative, morally conservative than my mama, then they have to believe in what Strom Thurmond and Jesse Helms and what's this guy's name, Boehner, who's the head of the Boehner, who's head of the Republican Party right now. And that's just foolish. My mother was morally conservative, but she would never have been politically conservative. And so I think that one thing we have to do is try to step aside, sort of try to step aside from the role religion is playing in the public sphere right now, or try to separate it from its political implications, because they're all screwed up now. I mean, what religion is supposed, the political implication religion is supposed to have is that we're supposed to be fighting for justice and fighting to free people and trying to narrow broad gaps of disparity of power and wealth. And so in that sense, we really want to see religion, the politicality or the implicit politicality of religion. Religion is supposed to be a force for justice. We're supposed to be striving to make this a just world and fighting against the selfishness that we're seeing in the world and all of the oppression and exploitation that we're seeing in the world.
Thank you, Dr. Hendricks. We're going to hear this question and let Dr. Sayeed make a comment. We're running out of time, so quickly.
Hello, my name is Nathaniel Hainsworth, and I go to Philadelphia Biblical University in Langhorne, Pennsylvania. I'm studying Master in Divinity. I'm also was accepted as a PhD student at Dallas Theological Seminary. My question is to the group, it's a distinguished group, is I'm hearing a lot of negative about religion. My heart is for the black church. That's why the reason why I'm going to school is to be able to develop the black church as far as the leadership, as far as the pastoral leadership and things of that nature. I'm hearing a lot of negative aspects of the church. I mean, not the church, religion in its spheres. My question is, do you have any action plan or any type of solution for believers like myself who wants to develop the church and be able to get people to be able to understand faith as it is and not what it is? Because I'm hearing a lot of, again, comments based on what I believe what the Bible says, because we all have different opinions, but I go by what the Bible says, and that's how I develop.
Let me just cut in and say this. You know, it's simple. If people should just take Christian church, take Jesus seriously, and take his teaching seriously. And when he said, "Follow me," then take that seriously. And all this, worship him and fall at his feet and all that, that is not what he asked for and what he called for. And understand there's a difference between his teachings and churchianity. That is, I think, a very succinct way. If we can start taking that as a perspective, then maybe we can turn this thing around from a bunch of entertainment and a whole lot of fun and calling it church and get out here and do something that makes a difference.
I totally agree with you. I totally agree with you. But I believe. I totally agree.
Sir, that will have to be the last word. We are out of time. This is television.
We'll see you. Okay, I'm sorry.
And we thank everybody. Thank you for being here. You've been a great audience. This has been an amazing panel. Let's give them all a hand. Thank you again, Harlem Book Fair, C-SPAN. Have a great day.
Is it over? We done got through. We done got through already.
Hey, Carl, thank you. This wasn't long enough.
It wasn't long enough.
I appreciate very much that you. I had to hold back a little because I had students.
He actually said that.
I love it. My wife's very.
Thank y'all. You were wonderful.
Oh, okay.
And contemplating.
Oh, okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, sister, for your comments. I want, you know, this was long.
Yeah. Well, we can have lunch.
No.
S-A-Y-E.
Oh, yeah.
E-E-D, 2 E.
It was amazing. Yes. Hi, how are you? How's that? How are you? Hi. Yes, I did. In Santiago, yeah.
So, Carlton, I got
okay,
I can tell you, I got an email. This was several years ago. All right, brother.
As the religion panel comes to a close here in the Langston Hughes Auditorium at the New York Public Library's Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture, host to several of the events at the 12th Annual Harlem Book Fair. Coming up next, a panel of authors discuss human rights and the presidency of Barack Obama. More from the 2010 Harlem Book Fair after this break.
The Organization of American